Myanmar's military regime has announced that, beginning in December, it'll hold the war-torn country's first general election since it seized power in the 2021 coup. But far from ending the civil war and returning the country to democratic rule, the planned election has been denounced as a sham, intended to legitimise and entrench military rule. So in this video, we're going to explain how and why the regime is planning an election, and how it may impact the civil war going forward. Dive deeper into politics with our magazine, Too Long. Yes, we made a real physical magazine. In the latest issue, we discuss if Europe can really defend itself, why people like Putin get away with it, and if we're observing the end of the American order. Find out more by clicking the link in the description. Early last week, Myanmar's military junta said the initial phase of the country's election would begin on the 28th of December, with dates from the subsequent phases to be announced later. The military has also lifted the 4-year state of emergency and nominally transferred power to a civilian-led interim government to prepare for the election, although coup leader Min Aung Hlaing continues to wield ultimate power as military chief and acting president. As such, it's seen as little more than a symbolic move, rather than an actual transfer of power. The junta has been promising to hold an election and hand over to a civilian government since its 2021 coup, but has repeatedly delayed the promised vote owing to the security situation and its lack of control over the country. The February 2021 coup overthrew Myanmar's democratically elected government, ending a short-lived period of imperfect democracy during which Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won landslide victories in 2015 and 2020. The coup sparked widespread civil resistance, which was met with lethal military repression, sending the country spiralling into full-scale civil war. This has pitted the military against the pro-democracy armed resistance in the form of the People's Defence Force, largely made up of Myanmar's Bamar ethnic majority, but also against an array of powerful ethnic armed organisations that have been fighting central authorities for decades, seeking greater autonomy in their peripheral regions. Increased coordination and cooperation between these new and established groups, whose shared goal is the creation of a federal democratic state, put the military on the back foot through 2023 and 2024, and by the end of last year, the military controlled less territory than at any time since it first took control of Myanmar in 1962. BBC analysis at the same time estimated that the military had full control of just 21% of Myanmar's territory, although it does retain control of its major population centres, where resistance groups have struggled to break through. More recent mapping by journalist Thomas van Linge shows the extent of each resistance group's control. The war has left the country in a dire state. Thousands have been killed, millions displaced, with massive humanitarian needs, and a shattered economy, all made worse by a devastating earthquake earlier this year. A full election timetable has not been set out, but according to the government, the first phase of the election will see voting held in 102 out of 330 townships, reflecting the junta's limited control and inability to guarantee security nationwide. Many of the major resistance groups have condemned the military's plans. The exiled National Unity Government has urged people to oppose and resist the elections, saying that the military does not have the right or authority to conduct elections, while major ethnic armed organisations have declared that they will not allow the election to take place in the territories they control. As such, the junta has enacted new laws that provide for strict punishment of those disrupting the electoral process. International observers have denounced the planned election as a sham, aimed at giving the military regime a veneer of legitimacy. The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar has called it a charade and a fraud, while a coalition of international election experts has said a genuine election is impossible under the current conditions, pointing to the detention of political leaders and activists, severe media restrictions, draconian legislation banning opposition parties, and more. Prominent opposition figures like ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi of the dissolved National League for Democracy remain in prison, while others are in exile, suggesting that victory for the military-aligned USDP is all but certain, with 25% of parliamentary seats also reserved for the military itself. Even though the election looks set to entrench the military's power, it has not come without risks for General Min Aung Hlaing. While he's been unchallenged in his position since the 2021 coup, the unprecedented territorial losses that he's overseen have driven widely reported dissatisfaction with his leadership among the military elite. So the transition from state of emergency to constitutional order and nominally civilian government could provide an opportunity for other elites, who are by no means Democrats, to compete for power. The military sees the election as an opportunity to weaken its international isolation. Since the coup, Russia and China have been the junta's only major backers, and it is in fact China that has been pressuring the junta to finally hold an election after many delays. Analysts suggest that this election is basically the junta's side of the bargain, as China's support has been a lifeline. The International Crisis Group writes that China would rather deal with a nominally civilian government that, while not legitimately elected, would amount to a return to a more predictable constitutional order, and one in which power was more evenly spread across several positions than being solely in the hands of Min Aung Hlaing, who Beijing doesn't particularly like or trust, despite its overall support for the junta. Ultimately, China wants stability on its border and the safety of its economic interests and strategic assets in Myanmar, such as the partly realised China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, an artery of the Belt and Road Initiative that connects China to the Indian Ocean. With a view to securing stability, China has been trying to press the ethnic armed organisations that are active along the border into ceasefires, as well as trying to get them to go along with the elections. Other regional players may be open to accepting the results of the election too, viewing a flawed election as better than no election at all. For example, for neighbouring countries like India, Bangladesh and Thailand, which have all been impacted by spillover from the war, an election and nominally civilian government may be seen as a stabilising measure and could provide diplomatic cover for greater engagement with authorities in Myanmar. We've already seen the beginning of creeping diplomatic normalisation, with Min Aung Hlaing, sanctioned by the West and wanted by the International Criminal Court, attending a regional summit in Bangkok this April, where he held bilateral meetings with several regional leaders. But while some governments are hoping that the election will bring a degree of relative stability, it comes with a serious risk of intensifying the conflict, as resistance groups fight to disrupt the vote and the junta ramps up its military campaign with the goal of capturing as much territory as possible before the vote. For example, airstrikes, which have become a favoured deadly tactic of the military during the war, continued through this month with devastating effect. Now, the military's election plan has been covered across the media landscape, with 119 sources reporting on it. Taking a closer look, you can see that 19 of these sources come from the right, and 23 of them come from the left. There are some differences between each side of the political spectrum, with the left emphasising the humanitarian crisis and widespread opposition boycotts, and the right often using more pragmatic, occasionally cautious tones. We're able to get this in-depth analysis thanks to our sponsor this week, Ground News, a website and app that collects articles from around the world, helping you burst your media bubble. For every story just like this one, you're able to see just how many sources are reporting on it, as well as where those sources fall politically. And that's important, as the same story can take a completely different meaning depending on how it's framed to us. Something that we find helps us tackle this problem even further is their fantastic blind spot feature, a newsfeed dedicated to showing us which stories are improperly covered by one side of the political spectrum or the other. Here you can expand your own viewpoint, or simply help you understand someone else's media reality. It's no secret that the current media landscape is constantly trying to capture your attention and sway you one way or the other. So, having a tool that helps you understand bias and how it affects the media you consume is extremely crucial. If you're interested in staying on top of the news and want to explore more of the amazing features Ground News has to offer, we're offering 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started today.